All right, we're going to get started here. Welcome everyone, and thank you for coming. My name is Jeremy Burton, and I'm the Executive Director at the Jewish Community Relations Council. We have a very special program today featuring individuals and organizations that are very close to us at JCRC. Joining us are Robi Damelin and Laila El-Shaikh of the Parents Circle Families Forum. The Parents Circle is one of the groups that we support and work with through Boston Partners for Peace. It is a group of bereaved Israeli and Palestinian families who have lost immediate family members due to the conflict. They are now challenging their loss into activism for peace and for a resolution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And from Boston, we have a dear friend of JCRC, Chaplain Clementina Chery, a JCRC Israel Study Tour alumnus, and the founder, president, and CEO of the Louis T. Brown Peace Institute. Robi, Laila, and Reverend Chery have all lost children to violence. Where they might have turned their grief into bitterness and despair, they have collectively spent decades working to sow seeds of peace, reconciliation, and love for their fellow human beings. While the contexts are different, the similarities between these three women connect them in a profound way. And we are looking forward to hearing each of their stories and to them engaging with each other to help educate and inspire us. There will be a brief opportunity for questions at the end of our session. As always, please use the Q&A function to submit your questions to our speakers. Briefly, Chaplain Clementina Chery, known as Tina, founded the Peace Institute in 1994 in Boston after the murder of her 15-year-old son, Louis. For more than 25 years, Reverend Chery has used her experience as a survivor to serve families impacted by murder, to advocate for survivors of violent crimes, and develop best practices for homicide response. Robi Damelin and Laila El-Shaikh live in Israel and in the West Bank, respectively. They are both bereaved mothers, and members of the Parents Circle Family Forum. You can read their full bios on our website and in the chat. Tina, Robi, Laila, thank you for joining us today. And Tina, I'd like to start with you. Can you tell us a little bit about your personal journey, how you came to found the Louis D. Brown Peace Institute, and what kind of work you're engaged with?
Thank you so much. And to my sisters from across the ocean, I am honored to just be here with you and as we share our hearts as mother. I often tell people if I knew what I was doing, I would really be a very dangerous person. You know, living in the United States, you know, an immigrant woman coming from Honduras to this country, really not understanding and not knowing. I thought I was living the American dream. Married, I was a stay-at-home mom. My friends would always call me an inner city wannabe suburban mom who looks like me and stays home and husband goes to work. Again, thinking I live the American dream. Violence is happening in my community. Violence is happening around my community. Yet, what I've heard was the justification as to, well, you know, these things happen to those type of people. And for me, I wasn't those type of people, or so I thought. I stayed at home. My husband went to work. I donated to the needies. I was an active participant in my church. And so I was doing everything God wanted me to do. And it was those people. Until death, I say, kicked my door down December 20th of 1993. That's when I realized I am the people I thought I wasn't, because that's when the media speculated who Louis was. It was a drug deal gone bad. He was in the wrong place at the wrong time. He had a criminal record. Maybe he just came out of DYS. So all the things that we talk about in urban settings with families is what I kept hearing. And so I needed to figure out what else I needed to do. I left the hospital empty-handed, physically and within my soul. Because again, at that time, there were no resources The city of Boston had no resources to give to families after the tragic and violent death of a child, especially if you look like me. And so my first thought was, how do I pay this forward? After the media speculator realized that Lewis was a good kid, he wanted to be the first Black president of the United States. He had goals, dreams, and vision. Then the narrative changed. And then my family and I wanted for nothing. Resources came to us. I then wonder, well, what if Lewis was gang involved? What if he was a drug dealer? What would my family and I benefited then? So that's when I wanted to change the narrative. I didn't want to focus on who killed Lewis Brown. I didn't want to talk about guns and gangs. I really wanted to look at how do we, as a society and a culture, transform the way we respond to families impacted by murder. So working with the mayor, the city of Boston, we really started to teach the value of peace through literature and community service learning. Equipping the teachers, how do we teach peace? And then giving the students the opportunity to talk about murder, trauma, grief, loss, racism, and shift that narrative and teach peace. The other part is, again, equipping our institutional stakeholders. How do we make sure that when death notification is given to the families, we make sure that the families are equipped with the tools that they need so that they can begin to bury their loved ones with dignity and compassion. So working with our hospitals, our law enforcement, our elected officials, really making sure they all have that survivors burial and resource guide so that they can make the death notification that's coordinated, compassionate. And then the other part, we wanted to move away from just talking to also now action. We know without our political leaders, we can continue to do, but if it's not sustainable, then we are just working in cycles. So the next part of our phase is that we wanted to train. We wanted to equip other institutional stakeholders, and we also wanted to amend our state victim compensation that denies families the basic burial services that they have if a loved one is killed by the police or deemed that they contributed to their own demise, which is what we're told within communities of colors that we're dealing. So moving forth is now going to the national scale and national level. How do we really look at legislators, our congressional leaders, and at the same time, how do we use the voices of those that have been impacted by murder, trauma, grief, and loss on both sides? I needed to know who could raise a child that could kill. So I needed to meet Doris, the mother. I tried with our elected officials, our law enforcement, and they didn't make it happen. It was another mother, woman to woman, heart to heart, that I offered, and I extended my hands of forgiveness. And through our work with our community reentry preparation program, as families on both sides are impacted by murder. So we can't do this work one-sided. We must really work together to make sure that within our community, we are not creating barriers and walls, and we're victim and offender. So that's it really in a nutshell. And I'm really, again, looking forward to just connecting with Robi and Laila. And, you know, a part of my trip to Israel, that was one of the highlights of my time, is just being in their presence of parent circle. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Reverend Tina. I'm going to invite first Robi and then Laila to come into this conversation. And Robi, if you would be able to share next to tell about your story and how you came to be involved in the parent circle and the kind of work that you're involved with now. And then we'll go to Laila.
Firstly, thank you very much. It's important that we give this message, which is not local, but international, to as many people who are willing to listen. And I would be thrilled if there would be people who actually did not agree with us, because that is where we need to talk, and we need to create a listening that has empathy. When the army came to tell me that David had been killed by a Palestinian sniper, one of the first things that I said is, you may not kill anybody in the name of my child. I had no idea that I said that, but it was something prophetic about what I was going to be doing for the rest of my life. I knew almost immediately that I wanted to do something, excuse me, to prevent other families from experiencing this pain. I knew that that would be the rest of my life, but I had no idea where I would find this framework. I also knew that one Palestinian killed my child, not the whole Palestinian nation. And that's a very important part of how you can move forward. So a religious Jewish man came to see me. His name was Yitzhak Frankenthal, and he created the Parent Circle. I think he was a bigger bulldozer than me, and that's quite difficult to find. And he invited me to come to Jerusalem to meet other Palestinian and Israeli families who'd lost children and brothers and sisters. I went. I remember sitting around a table and looking into the Palestinian eyes of the mothers and realizing that we shared the same pain, and realizing that when we stood over a grave, whatever tears would fall would be the same color. And I also realized how amazing it could be if we could stand on the same stage together and talk in the same voice for reconciliation and for nonviolence. And that if we could do it, then surely that would be an example for everybody else. And so I closed my office and decided that this would be my life from now on. And I started to travel all over the world. And I spoke, you can't imagine in how many places, with Palestinian partner, even in a hip hop concert in Golden Gate Park with like 60,000 people, and in Congress. And I thought I was really terribly important. And then I came home, and one night there was another knock on my door, and I went to the door and I opened it, and there were 3 soldiers standing there. When there are 3 soldiers, it can only mean one thing. So I banged the door in their face. I couldn't bear the thought of losing another child. And they kept knocking and knocking, and then eventually I opened the door and they said, "We've actually come to tell you that we caught the man who killed David." And they imagined that I would be delighted, you know, and that I would leap around my lounge with joy and revenge. But of course, this was the most difficult thing that could happen, because then I would have to walk the talk. Now there was a face. You know, it's not about going around and giving talks and talking about love and peace and all of this stuff, but do you really actually mean it? Took me 3 months. I wrote a letter to the family of the sniper. His name is Thaya, and 2 Palestinians from our group delivered it. It was a shock for the family, as you can imagine. And they said if everybody signs on this letter, maybe there could be peace. And in the letter, I told them about the Parent Circle. We are more than 600 families who've all lost an immediate family member to the conflict. And all of us are aligned to this message that there has to be a framework for a reconciliation process to be an integral part of any political future peace agreement. Otherwise, you know, what we will have is a ceasefire until the next time. I think I also said in the letter, I told them about David. David was a student at Tel Aviv University, and he was doing his master's in the philosophy of education, and he signed the letter that officers signed not to serve in the occupied territories. And he was part of the peace movement, and he headed the student uprising. And he was quite a special person. I know that from the reaction even to this day, all the time. Everybody who ever came in contact with him has been in touch with me, more or less. I think also in the letter, one of the things that was very important to me was I said we should meet, because we owed that to our children and grandchildren. And I expected, and they promised to give the letter to their son. Of course, I'm not the most patient character in the Middle East, so I imagine within days there'll be a letter from Thaya, but of course this didn't happen. And people think that reconciliation is kind of instant, but actually it isn't. It may never happen, and it may take years. And I think I only realized that much later on. It took 3 years for Thaya to write to me. He told me that I was crazy. I knew that already, and that I should stay away from his family, and that he killed 10 people to free Palestine. But you see, I knew from his parents that when he was a little boy, he saw his uncle violently killed by the Israeli army. And then when he grew up, 2 of his uncles died in the second uprising. And so he actually went on the path of revenge. He became a folk hero. He went to jail with the Fatah section of the jail. They made a film about him, wrote a book about him. But the extraordinary thing was, the minute I got that letter from him, I gave up being a victim. You see, I was no longer contingent on what this man did. And that is the biggest gift that I can give to anybody who's on this strange way of talking to each other lately. And that is, when you are a victim, you cannot move on. We are actually the Parent Circle is doing a workshop with 6 Palestinians, 6 Israelis, 6 Catholics, and 6 Protestants from Ireland, all about victimhood. How is it that you use your victimhood to manipulate in many ways? In any event, this was a sense of freedom that I gained. And I went to South Africa and we made a film about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And we wanted to learn lessons from them. And we met perpetrators and survivors who'd given evidence. And I met this extraordinary woman who had lost her daughter. And she'd gone to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and she said, I forgive you. And Clementina, we're going to talk about forgiving, because for me, the definition about forgiving is a very interesting topic. So I knew that I wanted to meet this woman because I also went to South Africa with this idea of looking into myself to see what I mean, or if I can forgive, or what is forgiving anyway. So I met her and we made the film, and she said, forgiving is giving up your just right to revenge. And then I met the man who actually sent the people to kill her daughter. And he was this extraordinary man. And he said, by her forgiving me, she released me from the prison of my inhumanity. And for me, that was one of the most meaningful statements that I heard all the time that I was in South Africa. And the 2 of them have an NGO to work with ex-combatants. I came back, I wanted to meet Thaya. I went to the Minister of Justice, who gave me permission. I asked for the police, and we were waiting. And then, of course, as is wont in Israel, we had to have some elections because, we need elections very often here, you may have noticed. And so the next Minister of Justice had no intention of letting me into the jail. But it's all right, and I'm at peace with myself. And if it happens, it'll be good. And if it doesn't happen, it's okay. And I can't tell you how privileged I feel to be a part of this organization, to be a part of the life of other people who have been filled with hatred and revenge, and to see how you can be a catalyst for change and watch people suddenly bloom and recognize that, there's no revenge, and that hatred and violence will not get us anywhere. And so, as sad as it is to lose a child, and there's nothing worse, we all 3 know that, the privilege of being a part of this organization, of being a part of lives of others who now can breathe and feel free, is the greatest gift that I could have given, and that David maybe gave to me when he left. Thank you.
Thank you, Robbie. And now let's invite Laila into this conversation as well to share how you came to be involved in the Parent Circle, your story, and candidly, how your work in Palestinian society may look different from what Robbie described.
Hi, everyone. I'm so thankful for you to give us this opportunity to share with you our personal story. My name is Laila El-Shaikh. I'm from Bethlehem, from Palestine. I was born in Jordan. So in 1999, I came to Bethlehem because I met my husband in Jordan, and we came to continue our marriage and to live in Bethlehem because originally my husband from here. So it was the most amazing thing that happened to me. It's kind of dream come true for every Palestinian who burned outside Palestine to come back and live inside Palestine. So the first year was amazing. And after 1 year, we have our first daughter, and we were much happier because we started to have our own family. But after 2 months, the second uprising was start. I was thinking in the beginning it will be just for a few days and everything will be end, but unfortunately it's become much worse and worse. And for me, that was something I wasn't live in before. And that was so hard for me. But at the same time, I was just thinking about my family and how could I take care of them? Because at that moment, the Israeli government take a decision that they stop giving people like me who came from Jordan their Palestinian ID, so I can go freely from place to place, but I don't care because I have my own family. After second year, we have our second child. He was a boy, we named him Qusay. He was a very intelligent, beautiful boy. The 11th of April, 2002, 4 o'clock in the morning, he was woke up in a very critical condition because one day before the Israeli soldiers came to our village and threw tear gas, and he smelled some of it. He was at that time just 6 months old. So the treatment at that time wasn't good enough. In our village, we tried to take him to Bethlehem to a hospital, but the Israeli soldiers prevented us from taking him. So the second chance was to take him to Hebron. It's the next city to Bethlehem. But again, they said that the main road is closed. So the only chance that we have to take him to Hebron, but through a rough and long road, but it was the only chance that we have. So between two villages, we faced again another Israeli checkpoint. They searched the car, they asked about the ID of me, of my husband and my father-in-law. And then they check the car. Then my father-in-law speaks to them, and he said that our son should be in a hospital as soon as possible, but they didn't care and they didn't listen. They asked us to stay in the car until they allow us to move. During that time, I started to think, what should I do? My son was dying between my arms. I didn't know what to do, feel hopeless. So I think to have a rest and go to talk to them. And the rest that if they find that I didn't have my Palestinian ID, they will maybe take me to jail or send me back to Jordan. But the only thing that I was scared about is my son and his health. So I went to them, started to talk to them, then they start to laugh at me and they asked me to stay in the car more than 4 hours until they allow us to move. So when we reached the hospital, the doctors said that if he will stay alive after 48 hours, he will be handicapped. So that was so hard for me as a young mother to hear. At the end of that day, he was died. And that was the most hardest thing because the doctor said that we were so late to bring him to the hospital. So it was the hardest thing maybe happened to me in my whole life. From that moment, our life changed. And it's come like upside down. Everything was changed. But at the same time, I wasn't thinking of revenge. The only thing that I was thinking about that the Israeli soldiers tried to have an excuse for anything they've done. They said that the Palestinians threw stones against them, or they're snipers, or they do something else. But what's the crime that my son was done? He's just 6 months old. And that was stuck in my head for more than 16 years. And for me, I was thinking that all the Israelis were responsible about his death. So after this 16 years, I was talking to one of my friends, and he started talking to me about the burn circle. In the beginning, I was really angry from him. And I said to him, how could you speak to me about something like that? You know what happened to my son? And he said, yeah, I know. And because of that, I want to tell you about the forum. And he said to me, I want to ask you a question. Why until now you didn't tell your other children about what happened to their brother? I told him because I didn't want them to be part of this cycle of violence. I didn't want to lose any one of them. I lost one of them, and that was much more than enough for me. Then he started to call me every 2 days or 3 days and started to convince me until one day he invited me to a conference in Bethlehem for the forum. In the beginning, we were just Palestinians. I sat with them, started to talk with them. But 5 minutes later, the Israelis started to come to that room. I was trying to leave because I started to feel that my chest started to ache me. I didn't want to see them. But when I tried to leave, he said to me, please sit down and listen to them. And after that, you could decide whatever you want to do. And I was really shocked when I saw both of them, the Israelis and the Palestinians, start to hug each other and kiss each other like family members. And that was the first time I saw something like that. And I really want to sit to listen and to see what is the thing that make them so close to each other like that after all these years of conflict and losing. So when the Israelis started to talk about their personal stories, I was really touched because for the first time, I looked at them as a human like me, as parents who lost their beloved ones. We share the same pain, as Robi said, and we share the same tears. And there's many common things, even above all the things that we live. So from that day, I really decided to participate in one of the projects. And that project called Burn Narrative Project. In that project, the first activity was to sit in front of Israelis and start to talk about something happened during the conflict. So it was the first time I speak about what happened to my son. It was the first time after his death I spoke about him. And it's like to open the wound again and bring the whole memory back and the whole emotion. And then I stopped in the middle of the story, start to cry. And there's an Israeli woman came and she sat in front of me and she said to me, I'm so sorry. And I was asking her why you are apologizing and for what? And she said, yeah, I know I didn't hurt you, but the people who hurt you from my own people. And I'm a mother too. I could understand your pain. I could understand even the words that you can't say it. And she came and hugged me and she started to cry. And really her word was touched my heart. And she didn't know that by her simple words, how she changed my life. And she opened my eyes and my heart to accept and understand the truth around me, that not all the Israelis are responsible about his death. Not all the Israeli want to kill us. And from that moment, I decided to be a member in the forum. And I find a lot of things and discover a lot of things, not just about the Israelis, even about me. And I start to give lectures inside Israel, Palestine, around the world about peace and reconciliation. And I found that was so easy to speak about, but the most important thing to feel it from your heart, because we are not expert in this field. But when you start to talk from your own heart, you start to really to be much more convinced. So after that, I start to think about forgiveness and how could I do that and why I should do that. And I find that I want to do this not just because of my son, even because of me, because when you feel of hatred and anger for many, many years, that will affect your life and affect even your health. And you find that even that hatred and anger has damaged you in the beginning, not just damaged people around you. So the transformation that happened to me was amazing. When I look to myself now and I look to myself before 4 years, it was really amazing thing. Even my family, they found that how I become a new person after all these years and after all that hatred and anger. But some people think that when you forgive, that means that you will forget, but this is not the truth. The pain is still the pain. And we still have that pain inside us, but that didn't mean that we still have that hatred. And one of the most important things that I have brothers and sisters like Robi, and I thank God that he gave me this opportunity to have new friends and new family members. Thank you.
Thank you, Laila. Thank you, Robi. Thank you, Chaplain Tina. As a reminder to the audience, to use the Q&A function to submit your questions. I think we're all just sort of like, I know I find myself sitting here just being profoundly like in awe of your willingness and to open yourself up and tell these stories, and realizing that you tell this probably many, many times over and over again in your work, and would love to discuss that with you. But before we get there, I'd really like to step back personally. And I know that if we were in person, and I know that Tina and Robi have had this experience, I believe you met each other in person once, but I'd like to step back a little bit and just take myself out of this conversation for a few minutes and really invite the three of you to engage with each other. And I'd really like to ask each of you sort of what you heard in each other's remarks that resonated with you, what connected with your own story. What did you hear in these voices and these perspectives of other mothers in the last half hour? And I'll just, step back and just invite the three of you to talk to each other for a little bit.
Firstly, Tina, where did we meet? I'm sorry, I'm senile.
That's okay. I had to go back when Eli called me. I'm like, wait a minute, I know her. I wrote about her. So we were, when I was a part of the JCRC Christian Learning Tour, 2000, help me guys, 2018? No. Yeah, 2018. I was there, and it was you and another gentleman that taught. And you gave me the parent circle, what is it? Oh, it's your recipe.
The jam session.
Yes, the jam session, yes. And so I think for me, hearing the both of you speak, sometimes it's hard for me to be in these spaces, because when I tell my story, I make the connection. It's usually, oh, it's those people, because it's Black on Black crime, and we want to tend to blame communities. So there's this kind of separation. And then when I'm on, a stage with sisters that I know may not look like me, we have different cultures, but yet what binds us together is that somebody murdered somebody we love. A mother's child murder another mother's child. And so for us, there's that interconnection. So hearing the both of you talk about the pain, and yet at the same time, not wanting to allow somebody taking our loved one's life to turn us into them. And Robi, when you talked about learning about the young man who was convicted of killing your son, his history, his past, who he was, his trauma, you know, seeing his family members killed and all of that, that's what we deal here within our community. And yet we don't get the same type of understanding because it's those people. And the same with you, Laila, you know, again, hearing as a way, as a mother, how you also talked about how this has changed you. It's like an oxymoron, you know, how can something so horrible that happened to us as mothers then change our heart to see the heart of others, to see the humanity in others? And so for me, being able to listen to the both of you and being privileged to have been selected to attend this Christian learning tour, still couldn't understand why I was selected because I'm not running a church, I'm running an organization. But what I got there, when I got there to Israel and to her and to listen to the parent circle and to all the other families, there was a sense of me, if this can be done in Israel, if these families who the worst of the worst has happened to them on both sides can come, I have no excuse in the United States. And I have to be even more stronger to help our community here, that we're privileged for everything, to really move away from victim and offender and to stop blaming Black young boys for the ongoing cycle of violence, and then to begin to hold our systems accountable for the ongoing cycle of kill or be killed, and then to hold our criminal justice system accountable for what it continues to do within our community. So there's just so much that's happening in my mind, and I have one of our special consultants, Lisa Fliegel, who's a special consultant to the Peace Institute, that again, when we know that we need to find something, especially of these young men that are within the criminal justice system.
You know something, Tina, I just want to offer you a comment. I watched the Democratic Convention with Hillary Clinton, and I watched the Black mothers who stood on the stage and told their stories. And 3 days later, the mothers of the police officers. And I thought to myself, this is insane. Why didn't they all stand on the stage together and say, stop the violence? And so I got this mad bee in my bonnet, and I decided I have to come to the States and I have to meet some of those mothers. And one of them was Lucia McBath and various other mothers of police officers. And we spoke at the Martin Luther King Museum in Atlanta, which is the most beautiful museum. But what was so interesting is this binding of mothers. There was no need for any bridge to be created to make us have a relationship. We loved each other instantly, yeah. And you know, it was just weird. And I was thinking a lot about Charlottesville. You know, I think that so much of the work that we're doing can be exported into America. The parallel narrative that we run, for instance. You know, I imagined in my head white people, not necessarily radically mad white people, but ordinary white skins, could go into the park together with African Americans who have slavery background. And they could sit around that statue, and each side would say why they think it should stay or why they think it should be pulled down. Now, it isn't that everybody will suddenly fall into each other's arms and love each other, but they will have listened with empathy to the story of the other, which is the beginning of the end, or the beginning of some kind of conversation which makes sense with empathy. And for me, that's the essence of the work that we do in the parent circle. And I wish that we could give it to you and that you would take this project and work with it, because it's an extraordinary, look at Laila's transformation just by meeting what you said, the humanity of the other. And I mean, we can actually have a discussion for hours because there's so much that we can share with each other. And I just, I'm going to be in the States in September, hopefully. Where do you live?
I live in Dorchester. Well, Robbie, that's it. That's the work that we do here. And so that's why this forum is important, because, and this was a part of my goal after I attended being an alumni of JCRC, is to how do we do this connection? Because that's what happens with us. As people of color, we do this work from the beginning, yet the work, the attention is never given to us. This is what we do here. We work with families on both sides of homicide. A part of my story, and that will never be told, it was because of me that Massachusetts has a victim offender dialogue. But I'm not going to get the credits. It was my white counterpart that did the first victim offender dialogue, but I will never get the credit. So this is the work that we do here. So I think for us, and that's why I truly appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation, because we could work together. There's survivors that are doing this work. A part of our work also is, you know, our community reentry preparation. Milton Jones runs that program, preparing the men before they come out to do their own healing, and then helping their families to do their own healing, and then working with the survivors so that we can do our own healing. So then when it's time for us to come together, we're doing it so that we are not continuing to respond. So we do have a model, but my model will not be as promoted as the parent circle, because again, it's who I am. And this is a culture of, you know,
I don't know, that sounds a bit victimhood.
So I would love for us to continue to have this conversation. And when you do come to Boston, I would love for you to come and see the Center of Healing, Teaching, and Learning that we have created. And then how do we sit on a stage together to be able to hear? Because even the mothers of those whose loved ones are killed by police, there's still that division. Even those whose loved ones are killed in the marathon bombing or in big, massive, there's still a division between those killings and the killings in the day-to-day suburban area. So
okay,
with
I can
us,
tell you something.
I'm gonna jump in.
One second, just 1 second. Please, let us never make comparison of suffering. It's not constructive. But you know, I'm just
that's what the
thinking
world
how,
does to us, though, Robbie.
I know,
That's
but
what the
we don't
world
allow
does
it.
to us.
You see, I can only tell you that Palestinian mothers who come to the parent circle in the beginning, I'll do this quickly, I promise you. Palestinian mothers that come in the beginning have never had an opportunity to tell their story, which is very much like what you're saying. And they have an opportunity, and the more they tell the story in the beginning, it's very, all the logistics of the death. Slowly, slowly, as they get opportunities to tell their story, suddenly they start to talk about the person that died. And that's the next step in healing. And I just, you know, for me, that has been such an extraordinary experience to see. So there's so many things that can be done through storytelling. And one of the problems that I've found with many of the people is that they don't know how to tell their story. And that's what has to be worked on as well, because people don't have patience to listen to anything more than 15 minutes of a story. And that was one of the things that I wanted to do in the States, but I just came back here because this is where I live.
So I wanted to jump in, and I noticed I wanted to ask Laila to come into this conversation. And I know we're also mention has been made of sort of like dynamics of Tina referenced the sort of the black on black dynamic that she's dealing with, and but there's a different dynamic of two different communities or separate communities of Israelis and Palestinians. I also noticed in the conversation. Robi, you're talking about the voices of Palestinians not being able to tell their own stories. So I just wanted to, like, before we get to any questions, to make sure, Laila, if you had any reflections on what's just been said and some of this conversation, for you to come back into this conversation as well.
Yeah, I want to say that a lot of people ask us always, where's this power come from, the power that you have? So I said, from our pain, we get this courage and this power, because we said in Arabic that the things that don't break you down, it's make you stronger. So I think we have the decision how to continue our lives. In the beginning, when my son was died, I wasn't want to do anything. I just wanna feel that I want to cry all the time. I didn't want to see anyone. I didn't want to do anything. But after I become member in the forum, I start to realize and feel that I want to stop looking to myself as a victim. And it's the time now to look to myself as a survivor, and how much that was helped me. And one of the things that helped me, that when we start to go to talk with the Israelis and start to understand the life that they live. And one of the stories that when I went once to a school for girls that they want to go to the army, it was so hard for me in the beginning when I know, because you know that the army for me, they were responsible about the death of my son. But when I went there and I found that they are at the same age of my oldest daughter, and I said, now I have the key, and now I start to understand where I should start to talk to them. And after we talk about our personal stories and about the forum, they start to ask us. And one of them, she asked me and she said, so what do you want from us to do? And I said, okay, this is the time, and you should know how to really answer her. So I told her, look, you have the same age of my daughter, and I love her so much, and I want to protect her from any harm. So, but at the same time, I can't take a decision and give it to her and said, you should do this and do that. I could give her advice. And for me, all of you look like her. And the thing that I want her to live in peace and to live in and do whatever she wants. I wish the same for you, but at the same time, I know that there's law and there's your community, your the things that you should do. It's not should be against your country. So if you choose to be in the army, please, the only advice that I could give it to you to deal with any other person as a human like you. Don't look to his color or his religion or whatever the difference between you and him. And she started to cry, and I was really touched, because I know that they're still children, and that one of the things that really helped me to forgive those soldiers, when I looked at those girls at the age of 17 and 18, and I realized that they are victims of their law and victims of their government. When you give a gun to a child at that age and put him in that crazy situation, he could do anything because he's afraid. He's a child too. So you start to understand the others. You could understand the way that they think. And some people think that when I say that, like I find an excuse for them. This is not the truth, but it's how do you start to understand the others, to forgive them, and even to stop looking to yourself as a victim.
Thank you. I want to, the hour runs by quickly, but I do want to get a couple of questions in, and one of them comes from Jeffrey, it's a dear friend, who, first of all, reiterates again to thanks to each of you for being here, and your stories and your commitment to peace and reconciliation are incredibly compelling and inspiring for all of us who are listening to this conversation. And Jeffrey's question is really, that in addition to the memories of your sons that you shared with us, what inspires you to continue to pursue a path of reconciliation in your work when so many others in our societies are choosing other paths, paths of conflict, paths of, dividing? What keeps you going?
I will answer this, Sir Robi. The one that make me continue is my other children and the other children and the other families that I start to know, and that we want to give their best future that maybe we didn't have, because there are the seeds in the ground, and how could you take care of to have that tree or to have that plant? So I look to this generation as that planet. How could you take care of? And this is our duty, how to take care of them. God give us our children as a gift. And when you have a gift from someone who you love so much, you want to take care of this gift and you want to put it in a beautiful place and put everything around it. So our children is a gift and we should take care of them, and we should do whatever we could in the best way. So I think.
Thank you. And that's beautiful. I'll just say quickly, because I know time is coming. I think for me, again, the children, if Lewis was alive, I wouldn't be a part of this. I really wouldn't. So it is honoring his, and the best way I can honor him is to extend my hand to the family and to the young man who was convicted of killing, and provide a space as survivors and of those who, families of those who survived the fact that their loved ones killed somebody. How do we come together? And providing that same space where healing, reconciliation, and accountability can begin to take place, while at the same time transforming the way society responds to homicide, because murders are still happening across the country. Nothing is changing. And as Laila said, the children. I have 2 grandchildren. Alexander is 8 and Adrielle just turned 1 year old. So for the sake of, I call this generation peace, that I continue to make sure that my grandchildren are growing up in a city of peace, and it's a culture that's not going to judge them by the color of their skins, but is going to look at their heart. And being here in the United States of America, we know it's happening there. So I don't want them to be killed by police or to then end up killing somebody else because we as a society did not provide a safe space, and that we can break down barriers between Blue Hill Ave and Fields Corner and Mattapan and Dorchester, that we are one city where all families can live in peace.
If we're talking about children, this is the thing that terrifies me. We've just had a war, 67 children died. The children in Gaza, how are they going to grow up? What kind of life are they going to have? Will they have any hope? They're going to grow up. What are they going to be as adults? Will they be filled with hatred? What about the children who live in Ashdod, Ashkelon, Sderot, all the towns that are on the border of Gaza? How will they grow up? With what kind of trauma will they have when they're wetting their beds at the age of 12? What are we doing? This is our responsibility. This is what keeps me going. I cannot stop because I think I am really worried about the future. I'm worried for these children. I too have 3 grandchildren, and I just think to myself, how can they contribute to creating a better world? And we have a summer camp that's just coming up now, where my grandchildren, one of my granddaughters will be there, and I'm so thrilled that she has this opportunity, because allow me to say one thing, bereavement doesn't stop with the mother. It passes on from generation to generation. And we have to find a way to stop all this killing. For what?
Thank you. And I would say for the audience, I think because of the way the technology works, you can only see the person speaking, but I'm able to see all three of you, and I'm seeing all of the nodding of heads that is going on as each of you is talking, and it's a beautiful thing to watch. I guess, we'll wrap up with one quick question, and then we'll have some closing remarks and just some next steps. But is there one key lesson, just briefly, to our audience, many of whom have not experienced loss in this way as profoundly, to many who want to be supportive of this work, who want to know how they can help in this work of empathy and reconciliation? Is there one key lesson that you've learned in the course of doing this work that you want to share with our audience before we end?
Well, that's a really difficult question, because I think that what I've learned is gratitude. How extraordinary my life has been, and how extraordinary to have, as I said right in the beginning of the talk. But I also want to say that there are thousands and thousands and thousands of families now all over the world who didn't get a chance to say goodbye to their loved ones in Corona, who are not being looked after. There will be a huge trauma. And I think that it's really our duty to support wherever we can these families. Maybe even just say, write a letter to the person you lost because you couldn't say goodbye, and this is a way of completion. We cannot ignore what all these bereaved people who've had no solace, who couldn't go to a funeral, who couldn't sit Shiva. All of that is so terribly important. I think it's also part of our responsibility. And maybe if they look at the work of Tina and of Laila and of myself, they can see that you might be able to take this terrible bereavement and make a difference in your own community. And that'll give you a reason to get up in the morning.
I think for me, quickly, thank you, Robbie. I think for me, a few lessons, but one is how do we just look at the humanity as who's in front of us? Just really the humanity, and move away from what the media is proposing. Those people, those people, am I my sister's keeper? Am I my brother's keeper? And then finally, for me, healing. We're doing this work, and healing needs to be a part of an integral journey. Don't expect us to come and tell our story and tell our story and tell our story, and then we go away and there's no healing. Because again, as Laila said, and Robbie, we have children, we have grandchildren. I'm done. I'm preparing. This generation is doing this work, my co-directors, Rachel and Alexandra, and they're going to prepare the generation behind them. So each generation. So hopefully by the time my grandson is 14, 15, things will have shifted. So I think just, some learning is, again, just look at us. Let's look at us as brothers and sisters.
Ella?
I think one of the most important things that I was learned is before you change the community, before you change anyone else, you should start from your own self. If I didn't feel peace in my heart, I will never could speak to anyone else. I will never have this courage to continue whatever happened, like the last war when it was happened in Gaza. And it was the first time happened, and I am a peace activist, and it was so hard for me, but I learned how to continue even during this tough time, and how could I talk to my children, and how should I deal with this situation, and call Robi and my other brothers and sisters from the other side, and to say, how are you? And to connect with them. So it's not just go to people and speak to the others, even to feel it and believe it from your own heart. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Laila, Robi, and Tina, for sharing your stories with us today. We here at JCRC, and why we do Boston Partners for Peace, is because we believe that listening with empathy is integral to creating a more hopeful future. And I can say on behalf of all the people whose questions and comments didn't get to be heard today in our short time, that the three of you today have really just inspired us all and given us more hope for what is possible going forward in the future. For folks in the audience, we're incredibly grateful to these three for giving us that hope. If you want to learn more about JCRC's work, including our Boston Partners for Peace, we're going to put the link in the chat. You can also learn more about the Parents Circle and the Louis D. Brown Institute by following the links in the chat for the Parents Circle, friends.org and ldbpeaceinstitute.org. We will have information soon about our July speaker series events, including, I hope, one that I will look forward to broadcasting live from where our guests are today on the other side of the ocean, if all goes well. And please check your inbox for information on future JCRC events. Thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Thank you so much.
Bye. Thank you, Jeremy.
Tina.